right, good morning, folks. We're going to go ahead and get started right now so that we stay on schedule. I want to thank you all for being here to talk about this very important issue. My name is Jeanette Mall. I'm the Juvenile Justice Policy Analyst here with TPPF, and I want to real quickly point out the other members of the Center for Effective Justice. We have Vikrant Reddy, the other policy analyst, and then Mark Levin is floating around here somewhere. You all know him as our wonderful director. We are here today to talk about a very specific part of the juvenile justice system, and that is referrals from the school system. It's a huge issue. There are over 5,000 referrals from our Texas schools to the Texas juvenile justice system every year. And when we saw those numbers, we started saying, you know, is this a good number to be at? Are we doing things right in the school discipline system? And what we did is we released a report, some of you have it on your chairs, that looks at school discipline and zero tolerance kind of in the aggregate. We wanted to know, are we doing the right things to keep our kids safe in schools? And unfortunately, what we found is we can't point to any measurable gains from the current school discipline system. We looked at victimization rates, a federal study of the victimization rates for children in schools, and we found that there was no change in the last 15 years of those victimization rates. Now, we need to figure out why we didn't have a change, even though we have a more stringent school discipline system. In Texas specifically, referrals to the juvenile justice system from schools are down, but they're actually down in the same ratio that they're down statewide. So we wonder if that's more attributable to the drop in juvenile crime generally, not so much something to do with school discipline system. And we also wanted to look at, is there a better way to do this? Can we do this in a way that saves money and keeps more kids in school? We spend over $500 million every single year on school discipline. Can we cut that down? Could we put that money back into education rather than on school discipline alone? We also know that the problem is very pervasive. One of our speakers, Carl Reynolds, is going to speak about a study that showed 60% of all Texas students have had a run-in with the school discipline system. It's a really high rate, and we wonder why that's happening, because I think I speak for many in the room that when we were in school, 60% of our peers were not in the school discipline system. That wasn't happening 10, 20 years ago. Why is that happening now, and is there something that we can do to fix it? So I am not going to belabor the point. I want to get our wonderful speakers on board. The first one that we have, as I mentioned, Mr. Reynolds from the Council of State Governments. He is an attorney, and he serves as their senior legal and policy advisor. He has extensive justice-related experience in all branches of Texas state government. He served as the director of the Office of Court Administration in the judicial branch for 7 years, and he also served as general counsel for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. Prior to 1993, he was the executive director of the Texas Punishment Standards Commission, a blue-ribbon legislative agency charged with reforming the state's sentencing laws and corrections resources. He also served as general counsel to the Texas Senate Committee on Criminal Justice. So he has a breadth of experience from all facets of the system. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Reynolds.
Well, thank you, Jeanette. Good morning. Thanks for queuing that up. I'm from the Council of State Government's Justice Center, and I want to say a little bit about the Justice Center first. We are a national nonprofit. The Council of State Government's a national nonprofit, bipartisan organization. In fact, I've got a couple of my board members here in the room. I want to point them out. Presiding Judge Sharon Keller from the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals is on the Justice Center board, and also the Honorable Jerry Madden, House member from here in Texas and chair of our Corrections Committee for many years, and they're both very involved in the work of the Justice Center. Great to have them here. I hope I get a good report back to Mike Thompson from you all. I also want to acknowledge we have the leadership of our juvenile justice system here in Texas in the room. Thank you for being here, Mike. Good to see you all. So I want to talk to you a little bit very briefly about an amazing study that the Justice Center did. Released this in July of 2011, and at the end of this quick PowerPoint, I'll give you a link to where this study is. You've got a nice little 1-2-page summary of the study at your seats, and I think that the things that one-pager touches on are the things that I will be touching on too. I'm going to do a real quick tour of what's unique about the methodology of this study. Real quick, superficial touch, frankly, on the 4 major findings that are in the study, and then an even briefer touch on what we're going to be doing, or what we are doing, as this work moves on. These are the 4 substantive points that we're going to hit on. and the first one Jeanette has already touched on. Formal disciplinary action in schools in Texas is remarkably common. Second, there are some disproportionality issues. African American students in particular are much more likely to have disciplinary action, and students with particular disabilities, emotional disabilities in particular, are more likely to experience discipline. As I'll mention, this study allowed us to do some elaborate multivariate analysis. That's the commuter train going by. Don't be alarmed. And kids that get disciplined in school have a much higher likelihood of other bad things happening. That's maybe not all that surprising. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, the study was able to discern some things about how the grown-ups in schools are reacting to the behavior of students. In other words, differential reactions on school campuses, within school districts, and even in districts that look identical from a statistical standpoint, drastically different kinds of reaction levels, discipline levels that we can see. I'm going to race through this because I really want to focus on just a handful of slides, so I'm not going to stop and belabor. But this is a real important point to make. Ryan Turner in a few minutes is going to talk to you about the scope of schools referring kids to the court system. This study does not look at that issue at all. Our study is focused on what happens in schools. But I do want to make clear that what happens in schools and what happens in terms of referrals through law enforcement to the courts are two potential responses that a school can have that are not mutually exclusive. So you're going to hear about two different sets of data, and I want you to imagine that there's a fair amount of overlap. I don't think we know the actual extent, but there's, of the tens of thousands of cases that get sent into our court systems from the schools, those same incidents are leading to school discipline in a large proportion that we don't exactly know. But our study is focused on what happens within the schools independent of that court referral. So the things that can happen in a school are these four boxes: in-school suspension, ISS, out-of-school suspension, placement in DAEP, disciplinary alternative education, and expulsion to juvenile justice alternative education. Texas is somewhat unique in having these two alternatives at the right end of the spectrum that are used when there's a conduct that triggers a mandatory disciplinary action and either a DAEP or a JJAEP placement. The other key thing about methodology and about this data that we were able to do is that we studied, and this is not me, it's a group of folks at Texas A&M Public Policy Research Institute and some terrific, very smart researchers with the Justice Center. I'm just here to deliver the message. They were able to study these cohorts of kids over an extended period of time. This was not a sample of Texas school students. This is every student record in the Texas school system database, the PEAMS database, over an extended period of time. So when I talk to researchers around the country about this work, they're salivating at the data set that we had at our disposal. And by the way, the data set is gone. Every time I talk about this study, someone says, which of those districts are the ones that were doing so poorly? Or they want to crack it back open again and see what we can learn about who's doing what in Texas. It's not possible, so that's one question I'd like to forestall at this point. We use three different databases. The one that I've alluded to is the PEAMS database, is in the middle here. And that has all kinds of information about individual students. And that's the kind of information that you always hear, FERPA restrictions on. We were able to overcome the many barriers of FERPA in conducting this study and look at student level data and match that data with the campus level information that is also held by TEA. And then also the juvenile justice system data. So there's the ability to look across data systems, and in fact, having identified a whole group of kids that touched the juvenile justice system, we were able to go back and find those same kids, records about those same kids, 87% of them we were able to find in the PEAMS data. So, and I want to be clear, about what that means. Jeanette told you a few minutes ago about the 5,000 cases that get referred to the juvenile justice system from schools. That's actually, from the court standpoint, that's not that big a number. There's a lot of cases in Texas courts, and 5,000 is one little subset. This doesn't mean that 87% of kids touched both systems. It means that all the kids that touched the juvenile justice system, we were able to match back and find them and find a record on them. So it gives us a great deal of confidence about looking across those data sets. As Jeanette mentioned, this is the volume piece. I'm going to talk about volume, disproportionality, the issue, the last issue, which is the way that the differential ways that schools respond, and one other conclusion. But this is the volumetric issue. So in a given year, 2011, there were almost 2.2 million disciplinary actions. Now, the teachers, if there were teachers in the audience, they would be quick to say, but look how many of those are in-school suspensions, the least onerous, the least reactive of disciplinary actions. And that's true. 1.5 million of these actions were ISS. They also affected, while it was 1.5 million actions, it was 600,000 students. So there are many students are getting disciplined multiple times. That just gives you a sense of that overall volume that leads to that 60% number that Jeanette highlighted. And there it is, 60% of students in Texas, over the course of the study, 60% of the students had the experience of being suspended, in-school suspension or out-of-school suspension, or expelled, again, to DAEP or JJAEP. And there's a reference to the number of violations. Median number of 4 disciplinary incidents per student. And we were able to look at at the spectrum. You'd see some cadre of students that get disciplined once, and and at the other end of the spectrum, 11 plus disciplines over time. Key point here: the vast majority of incidents, the conduct that the students committed, put them in the discretionary end of the spectrum. These were violations of the school code of conduct. This was not, carrying a weapon on campus, for example, that has a statutory expulsion as the zero tolerance, you've got to get out of school kind of a response. 9 times out of 10, a student was suspended or expelled for violating a code of conduct. So the key point there is that this has to do with the discretion that's being exercised at the campus level, at the school level. It's not a reflection of state law says we had to do this. We have a very wide array of choices here, and this is what we did. This is just a snapshot of the student population in Texas as reflected in our study. 40% Hispanic, 14% African American, a little higher than the statewide African American percentage, and 43% white. African American students disproportionately disciplined. This is the percent of students with 1 or more discipline action during the study period. 75% of all the African American students had experienced discipline, while lower percentages for whites and Hispanics. Higher percentages for males, not surprisingly. 83% of African American males experienced a disciplinary sanction. I am never going to make 2 minutes. But I'll keep going. I'm gonna race. I'm gonna hit educational disability real quick. These are the types of educational disabilities. We identified them by special ed status. The key one is emotional disturbance. A small slice, that 10%. You've got 71% of kids who are identified as special ed and have a disability as a learning disability. But the key point here is that kids with disabilities were also disproportionately represented in the disciplinary system. Now, this slide reflects the massive database that we had. Lots of work that we do in criminal justice and juvenile justice, you can see disproportionality in a system, and you can question, what does that really mean? Maybe there's disproportionate offending, and that's why there's disproportionality by race or by whatever. In this study, we were able to do multivariate analysis that holds everything else constant over 80 different variables. And what we saw was that holding everything constant, race and disability, especially learning emotional disturbance as a disability, truly mattered. Race in particular. African American students, 31% higher likelihood of getting disciplined in a discretionary context. And if the thought is, well, maybe African Americans act out more and that's why they get disciplined more, that next statistic kind of undercuts that thought, because in terms of mandatory actions, it turns out that African Americans were 23% less likely to be disciplined. So things where conduct that school administrators and teachers have very little discretion about responding to, it just didn't happen. It didn't happen disproportionately by African Americans. In fact, apparently it happens disproportionately less. Same thing in particular for emotional disturbances, holding everything else constant, a very high likelihood of disciplinary action against kids with emotional disturbances. Kids that experience disciplines have much higher likelihood of other negative consequences. They are more likely to be held back. They're more likely to drop out. Higher percentage of failures from classes. Kids not graduating. I'm sorry to race through these, but I was going to show you fewer slides than I've got up here. Moving into the juvenile justice connection, more than 1 in 7 kids in the study had a juvenile justice contact, disproportionately African American, disproportionately male. I'm just going to jump over this. If you read the study, you'll see this display quite a bit, where we've bifurcated all the students into these two groups, that 60% study group, the 60% group that had a disciplinary action, and you can see all kinds of interesting things when you bifurcate the population that way. The kids that had a disciplinary contact in this slide, 23% of them ended up with a juvenile justice contact. Kids without a disciplinary contact, 2% juvenile justice contact. The more, I mentioned the 11 times, the more times kids touch the disciplinary system, the much higher likelihood of juvenile justice contact. And again, that last bullet is a multivariate analysis. Kids who were disciplined, almost 3 times higher likelihood of touching that juvenile justice system in the next year. I'm going to go ahead and race through this. This is a key piece. If you do get a chance to look at the study, I encourage you to look at the discussion around finding 6. It's probably the most challenging methodologically and challenging for the reader to understand. The bottom line is we were able to predict the rate of discipline in all these different schools and then compare the actual rate of discipline in the schools to the predicted rate. And turns out, a fair number of schools disciplined at the expected rate, but another fair number disciplined at a higher than expected rate, and then some others disciplined at a lower than expected rate. And that cuts across districts, cuts across campuses, cuts across districts. It goes every different way. So the bottom line is it shows that the grown-ups are responding differentially than you might expect. And so that means that we need to learn how are they doing it in schools that have low discipline rates? What is it they're doing in schools that have high disciplinary rates? Recap those 4 points. I'm not going to bother. I'm out of time. And just briefly, we, the Justice Center, have taken this study. We've got some additional support from the federal government, a remarkable cooperation between the Department of Justice and the Department of Education. We've got some private foundation funding, and we're moving forward. We're about halfway through an 18-month process of developing what we hope will be a very influential report, a consensus project report that will reflect a wide variety of opinion and a wide variety of disciplines. We've got law enforcement, we've got juvenile justice, educators, academics who study this stuff, everybody you can imagine that would have a take on this issue involved in this national consensus project. We're shooting for next October in terms of releasing that report. So that's where we're at, and this is, I guess, the question for Chief Ward. Are we getting safer schools and better student outcomes thanks to our disciplinary policies? And there's the the link that I promised you at the beginning and my email. I've got a few business cards with me if anyone would like to be in contact later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Reynolds. That was great information. I just want to make two quick points. I mentioned earlier the $500 million annual cost for school discipline. One thing that you had mentioned that I think is really important to think about is whether or not our school discipline system is unnecessarily depressing graduation rates and the cost that that also inflicts. So it's not only the annual day-to-day costs, but also our future costs. And then the other thing I would mention is the CSG study focused on the in-school kind of discipline, the ISS, OSS, things like that. There's another facet which Texas Appleseed, we have a member of Texas Appleseed in our audience, has done a great job on focusing on. There's also Class C misdemeanor tickets. So students not only face the things that CSG kind of compiled, but there are over 300,000 Class C misdemeanor tickets issued to students in Texas schools every single year. And in that case, you pay a fine, you have to go to court. There's some other things involved with that. So that's another component that we need to be aware of in this system as well. So next up, we have a treat, because for those of us in the policy field, and no offense to the other policy wonks out there, we need to hear about what's happening on the ground. And Chief Ward is here to tell us exactly what he sees every single day dealing with a school discipline system. Chief Ward is the Chief of Police of the San Antonio Independent School District, and he was appointed chief back in May of 2009. Prior to joining SAISD, he worked as a patrol officer for the city of Balcones Heights, and he is a published author in Police Magazine. Please join me in welcoming Chief Ward.
No, I can just sit here, correct?
No, go ahead.
Yeah. Let's be comfortable and I'll be brief. You know, I've been fortunate to be involved in school district policing since its inception back in 1986. And as a matter of fact, in 1993, in the 73rd legislature, I helped author the bill to clarify a lot of things of what we do. First off, let me say that children today are safer in school still than anywhere else that they are. And that includes at home, on the streets, at the shopping malls. They're safer there. I've seen over the years that I've been there a change in focus on what it is that people expect school district police to do. And I'm here to tell you right now, our job is to enforce the law. We don't do school discipline. That's not our job. That's the job for the administration. And fortunately, when I was appointed, I worked for a superintendent that fully believed in that and said, get the administrators to do it. You don't do it. And I tell our people, we do not do school discipline. Prior to, I think it was 2 sessions ago, 37102 of the Education Code allows school boards to set rules. And including those rules are the Student Code of Conduct. And violation of them was a Class C misdemeanor. And some school districts went flat crazy over that. I mean, they're just nuts with zero tolerance. That's the dumbest thing I ever heard in my life. I'm here to tell you right now, okay? You know, I can't speak for the rest of you all in there, but I see some people that I know are probably, if those things were in place when they went to school years ago, they'd still be paying the fines. I know I would. What straightened me out was a couple of good whacks by the coats, and that, you know, that took care of it. As a matter of fact, there was a school district in Houston that employed constables, deputy constables in their schools. And the constable told his deputies, if you don't do what that principal wants you to do, I'm going to fire you and put somebody in there. And so what, of course, the principals do? They try and pawn it all off on law enforcement to deal with, you know, shirt tails out, chewing gum and all that. Dumb, dumb, and dumber. That's stupid. What we need to do, number one.
Stop sugarcoating it.
Okay. Let me tell you how I really feel. Zero tolerance does not work. It's dumb. It really is. And we need to get away from that. We need to teach our teachers and our educators. Our teachers, by the way, some of them who have been educated, that, you know, when Johnny goes a little crazy in class and pushes the teacher, she's been educated to say, I felt pain, which moved it into the penal code violations of assault on a public servant. Some of that is flat stupid. We need to make a change in 37081 of the Education Code that says the chief of police reports to the superintendent. Remove that designee. If it's important enough to have cops on school grounds, then they need to report directly to the boss, and that's what I do. And I'll tell you, that works well, okay? If you got the same person overseeing the police department or overseeing the chief that's in charge of food services, transportation, custodial staff, and all that, he has no clue as to what's going on. And we need to specify, because there's another school district down in my area, in their board policy, that they have the officer reporting to the principal of the school. That's dumb, okay? That's stupid. They report to the chief on some issues, but on other issues, they report to the principal. Principals and staff, administrative staff should have no say in law enforcement and the penal code system. And we need to use a little common sense, because I see a big lack of common sense out there. One of the things I tell my officers is, hey, that kid that you're dealing with, imagine that was you 20 years ago. Imagine that's your child or your grandchild. My grandson just turned 10 2 weeks ago. Oh my God, he hit that magic age of 10. He can be arrested or issued a citation. Oh, hell. I know how I want him treated, with a little common sense. That's what I tell our guys they need to do, is apply common sense to these things. You all remember after, I guess it was Columbine, people were arresting and suspending kids for having a little pocket knife. Dumb. Had a steak knife to, cut up their food that they brought from home instead of eating the cafeteria food. Let's get back to common sense. Let's have the law enforcement officers doing what they need to do. Enforce the law. And another thing I tell our guys is this a child being a child, or is it something else? What's the intent? Kids are going to be kids. I'm just saying, they're going to do it. What is their intent? Did they make you mad? As I'll quote Senator Whitmire, we need to save our justice system for those that we're scared of, not those that make us mad. So let's get back on track and get our kids out there and get them graduating, which is what our mission statement is to get all of our kids graduated that we can. And let's do that. When they talk about data, and I'm a data guy myself, and I look at things, and after seeing a couple of reports and this and that, all the open records requests for citations, I went back and analyzed our data, and then I had a thought and said, well, wait a minute. All these citations issued at school are not necessarily all students. They're parents acting out, creating a disturbance, fighting, especially over custodial issues. I went back and analyzed our data, and I looked at our high schools first. And of all the arrests and citations for the time frame that I looked at, over 20% were for people that were not students at that school. They were students at another school. People come over to fight somebody for whatever reason, or whatever, egregious thing they think occurred, or sell dope or something like that. Adults, over 20% were not students at that school in our high schools. But at the middle schools, they were almost all students at that school. And I think a lot of that has to do, number one, with an urban environment and the close proximity of schools to each other, where a student from one school can go to another school real easy and doesn't have to travel a far distance. So we need to look at that. We need to maybe refine our data to get a better picture of what it is that we're dealing with. I'm not advocating we decriminalize behavior on school campus. If it's good enough for the street, it damn sure ought to apply to the campus. But we need to teach our teachers that there are kids that are going to act out, and get our administrators to go through training that teaches them how to handle the problems and not foist it off on law enforcement, because by God, That's not our job. Thank you all.
That was excellent. Thank you so much, Chief. And it's so good to hear that, law enforcement is cognizant of the fact that the justice system isn't necessarily a place where school discipline should be housed. And we need to be really careful about making that distinction. What behavior rises to the level of justice system intervention and what should be handled in the schools? We've spent some time now kind of talking about what the problem is. And now we get to talk about what the solution is. What can we do that is going to be a better system than what we have right now? Is it going to cost less? Is it going to get more kids out of school, graduated with degrees? And to do that, we have Ryan Turner, who is here with the Justice Council. He is the General Counsel and Director of Education for the Texas Municipal Courts Education Center. That's his day job. Prior to joining the center, he served as briefing attorney for Judge Sharon Keller at the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. He is also Deputy City Attorney for the City of Dripping Springs and also has served as Special Assistant County Attorney for Kendall County. And in his role that he's in here today, he is the Advisory Committee member on the Texas Judicial Council's Juvenile Justice Committee. This year, it was charged with assessing the impact of school discipline and school-based policing on referrals to the municipal, justice, and juvenile courts, while identifying judicial policies and initiatives that work to reduce referrals without having a negative impact on school safety. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Jeanette. Thank you, everyone. What I'd like to do is I'm going to walk you through. I've got 5 slides, so this ought to go easy enough. Famous last words. I want to, if you're not familiar with the term "passing the paddle," this is a term that Chris Huebner and I coined back in the late '90s to describe kind of the wholesale outsourcing of disciplinary matters from public schools into our court system. And what I want to do to kind of illustrate this concept is I want to walk you through this hypothetical. I'd like you to imagine 2 children who are both throwing rocks at a window at a public school, all right? And once they are interdicted, they're caught by law enforcement. I want to illustrate to you how divergent public policy has made the potential outcomes for these 2 children who have engaged in identical behavior. Okay, so you've got the quote, the good kid. You all know the good kid, right? You were probably the good kid. I'm sure you were. When you got in trouble, you came in contact with law enforcement. It was yes, sir, yes, ma'am, no, sir, no, ma'am. Kept your hands in plain view at all times, right? Okay, now let's contrast that maybe with the quote, the bad kid. The bad kid uses profanity, likes to use yeah, doesn't tuck his shirt tail in, what have you. Now, I want you to assume that the peace officer decides that he's going to teach these 2 young people a lesson. The good kid, of course, will be shown some leniency, so we'll just give him a ticket, right? We're going to cut him a ticket. Now, the bad kid, of course, we're going to go ahead and take him downtown. We're going to book him, Dano. We're going to go ahead and let him take the long ride so he can understand the full impact of his bad decision making. Well, now I'm going to show you really how it's going to turn out. So you've got the fact pattern in your minds, right? You understand good kid, bad kid. Bad kid's going to be he's going to get the juvenile justice treatment. The good kid, he's getting a ticket. Now, I want to go ahead and delineate. For those of you who are not familiar with this, our juvenile justice system is predicated on civil law. It's a civil justice model, okay? Kind of a byproduct of the progressive era. Our criminal justice system is punitive, all right? So I'm really talking about Title III of the Family Code versus everything that's in the Code of Criminal Procedure. All right, let's go ahead and contrast the outcomes here. So in terms of the, quote, bad kid who's going to go to juvenile court, first of all, if he is indigent, he will have the right to appointed counsel. Regardless if this is a Chins case or it's delinquent conduct, he is guaranteed under Title III if he's indigent to the appointment of counsel. Now, the good kid, however, he has no right to appointed counsel whatsoever. All right, no right to appointed counsel. There is a provision in the Code of Criminal Procedure for interest of justice appointments, but no one had ever really contemplated where the money could come from to make those appointments because no one ever thought in a million years we would be sending 100,000 children to municipal justice courts. All right, now, here's the next point. The next point is that, that the entire civil juvenile justice system is predicated off of diversions. In other words, the last thing we ever really want them to do is to go eye to eye with a judge. We're going to use all the diversion systems we can to make sure they never see the interior of a courtroom. In contrast, the child, the good kid who got the ticket, will be required to make an appearance in open court with their parent. I want you to imagine the amount of resources, time, and energy that are consumed when you send 100,000 children and their parents to criminal court. All right. Now, once again, back to the quote, bad kid. The bad kid will never pay a fine because under the civil juvenile justice system, we don't use fines. It's supposed to be about rehabilitation. In contrast, the good kid will have to pay fines and costs. Now, I also want to point this out. Court costs in the state of Texas have gone up 1,863% since 1965. Okay, it seems like in recent years there hasn't been many court costs that the Texas legislature hasn't wanted to pass. All right, so 1,863% of increase, plus the fact that they're going to have to pay a fine. For, let's say that was criminal mischief, we'll go ahead and say maximum fine, $500. All right, now, back to the bad kid. Records are confidential from day one, okay? The whole thing will happen privately, okay? No way, media won't be able to gain access, no one's going to know. Okay, now we've made some progress on this side, and I want to go ahead and recognize Jerry Madden for his good work on this. We have made slow but steady progress. Last session, we have created something that's called, it's called conditional confidentiality, which states that once the child has satisfied the judgment in the criminal court, now it's sealed. All the documents are sealed, just like you were in the civil juvenile justice system. As much as people would like to give the kids on the criminal side of the ledger all of the protections that are on the civil side of the ledger, it's really not feasible. It's really not feasible. Okay, so I've set this up for you, giving you some context. Let me give you some numbers, because I think Carl can tell you I can talk all day using one slide. This is my Ross Perot trick right here. I could go all day with one slide. And to make sure you understand this, once again, yellow represents criminal jurisdiction in criminal courts, okay, the worst of the worst, because these are criminals, mind you, and the green represents civil juvenile justice Title III, those that our friend Bob Dawson helped, put the pillars in place. This is Title III, it's the juvenile justice system. Now, in the year 2011, according to Office of Court Administration data, this is what we know. We had 226 children who committed felonies who were certified out of the civil juvenile justice court into adult criminal court to stand trial for felonies. Okay, 226, worst of the worst. Now, let's talk about the next one. This is the one that really just kills me. CHINs, conduct indicating need for supervision, the SINs, it's actually conduct. I don't know how we get the CH. I think it's actually because we want to call it child indicating need for supervision. These are things that are essentially just not a good idea. Okay, huffing paint, not a good idea. Running away from home, not a good idea. One of the things that we've lost sight of is that it also includes everything that is a Class C misdemeanor and could have been filed as a CHINs petition. Why does it not happen? I'll tell you why. It's too expensive. It takes up too much time. We don't have enough resources. Juvenile justice resources could not handle the burden of all these cases. Now, the other thing that's staggering is if you look at this 887, that's like half the population of Dripping Springs, Texas, okay? Now, it's only more staggering when we get down to the far end, when we recognize that all these cases on the far end of the Class C misdemeanor ledger could have been filed as CHINs petitions. And probably in a perfect world, if money was no issue, they would be. And the other thing I'll just point out, I've been tracking CHINs data, and it's almost become like an endangered species. The number of CHINs cases, I talk to juvenile judges, they can't even remember the last time they saw a CHINs petition just by itself that was not tied also to a delinquent conduct matter. All right, okay, speaking of delinquent conduct, the topic for this hour is defeating delinquency, all right? And so the thing I'm already pointing out to you is a lot of the energy we're spending in terms of public policy and resources is really not aimed at delinquency as much as it is CHINs, okay, or SINs, or whatever you want to call it. Now, I'll call it the endangered species. To put this into context, we had 29,370 delinquent conduct petitions adjudicated in 1 year. Okay, so here's the big buildup. You saw this coming just by the way that the continuum is laid out. Remember, everything in the middle, civil juvenile justice, far end, worst of the worst, because they're criminals and we have to teach them a lesson. And, of course, the Class C misdemeanors, which why this is even on the continuum should make you scratch your head. I mean, you should ask yourself, why is it that we've criminalized all this stuff? Or why is it that we think that, a kid throws a rock at a $51 window, well, that's delinquent conduct. But he throws a rock at a $49 window, that's a Class C misdemeanor, he's a criminal, we're tough on crime. Okay, so watch this. Here's the numbers here. We're talking about 156,000 children, 156, 263 to be exact. And to make it clear, one of the problems, I think one of the reasons we've gotten here is because when the legislature hears Class C misdemeanors, they tend to think court cost and then they think traffic. Okay, that's what they think. And we really have to end this. This has to stop. We need to start saying Class C and who, because if Class C and child, if those two words are used in context, we have to have a different worldview about this. This number excludes all 118,000 traffic cases that were filed against children in that year that ended up in open court. It also excludes all DUI of alcohol cases. And by the way, here's the big dismount. It excludes all JP filings. I am just showing you the numbers that are being adjudicated in the courts that I work for. Okay? So that kind of gives you a context. So it should not be of a surprise when you look at the volume of numbers and you just look at this. In other states, you would just lop off this end, and then the delinquent conduct provision would actually be the CHINS provision. It would be larger. Okay, and then the delinquent conduct provisions would move over to the right. That's how it looks in other states, but Texas is different. Okay, Texas is different. It should not come as a surprise to you then that in the last State of the Judiciary address, it was the first time that the Chief Justice of the Texas Supreme Court took the time when addressing the legislature to point this out, to talk about what, there is debate about if there is a courtroom to prison pipeline. That's a debatable topic. There is no debate to be had about whether there is a classroom to courtroom pipeline. It cannot be debated. The numbers are obvious. And when he addressed this, he activated this, the Judicial Council created a Juvenile Justice Committee. There were advisory committee members, 14 of them. And from January until November of 2012, we essentially did what the legislature is getting ready to start doing. There was a lot of arguing, a lot of debating, a lot of contrasting views on what should be next and what is the right thing to do. And I have to tell you, at the end, I think that the byproduct is exactly the solution. I would like to break it down basically into 4 key recommendations. And if you look in your chairs, you have a handout, and the handout has an itemization. 14 summary recommendations describing what the current law is and what the Texas Judicial Council is recommending that the law should be. Okay? And what you will find, if you read this, is that, especially those of you who are involved in the juvenile justice area and public policy, that we've gone ahead and cut to the end of the story. You know how public policy typically works. I introduce the far left bill, you introduce the far right bill, we kind of negotiate, we come up somewhere in the middle. This is the middle. This is the solution that reflects something that no one likes all of it, and everyone likes some of it or most of it. And that's kind of the heart of these recommendations. Here are the 3 key concepts. 1, amend Chapter 37 of the Education Code. 2, amend Title 3 of the Family Code. 3, amend the Code of Criminal Procedure. Do it in the following ways. First of all, capacity. You heard the chief talk about intent. Recognize the fact that children, just because of the type of crime or the punishment of the crime that they're being accused of, should be treated no differently than children who are accused of Class B misdemeanors or Class A misdemeanors. We have to address this issue of capacity. Secondly, diversions. The entire civil juvenile justice system is predicated off of diversions. Senator Whitmire made it very clear coming out of the last session, he wants to reduce the number of Class C misdemeanors being adjudicated by courts. The Texas Judicial Council has met that charge. They have included a total of 13 different systemic diversions that, if put into place, will reduce the number of filings in these courts. All right? Parity. The disparity between the civil juvenile justice system and the criminal justice system when it comes to children accused of identical conduct, it's really too much. I mean, it's beyond the pale. In a perfect world, the recommendations of the subcommittee and the Juvenile Justice Committee would have just basically been send them all back to juvenile justice, send them all back to Title III land, get them out of municipal justice court. The problem is you can't unring the bell. I mean, the infrastructure has already been placed. And the fact of the matter is our civil juvenile justice system cannot handle the volume of cases that we're talking about. We need to accept the fact now, moving forward, that municipal and justice courts have become the de facto juvenile courts for many of the type of cases that historically would only go to juvenile probation services. Let's embrace it. Let's make this a better place for children. Let's make it a fairer place for children. And then finally, data. You heard Carl talk about all the great stuff, the great information that came out of the Breaking School Rules report. He also told you we don't have any data on Class C misdemeanors. One of the recommendations of the Judicial Council is that we need to go ahead and start collecting that data. We need to collect that data in terms of Class C misdemeanors so that we can have better, so we can make more informed policy decisions. All right, final slide. Outcomes. What does the Texas Judicial Council believe will occur if the package, and I want to make something clear. I've heard some discussion that people might want to cherry pick certain parts of this bill apart. This bill will work best if it is adopted in its entirety, okay? Now, people can debate the terms and the parts of it, but to just take one idea here and one idea really misses the fact that this is a work product that was, developed between January and November. I mean, it took most of the year of the Judicial Council and its advisory members to come up with these recommendations and these specific policy suggestions. So what would be the outcomes? One, it would stop outsourcing school discipline. It would stop outsourcing school discipline. One thing is the days of just writing tickets like you're handing out passes to a Jell-O shot bar on 6th Street will come to an end, okay? You will have to have probable cause. You will use complaints to initiate these cases. No different than we do in municipal court on city ordinance violations or when we're charging corporations or associations. The days of peace officers being put under pressure by school officials to write tickets for things that they have not seen and that they do not have probable cause to believe occurred, that will come to an end. Because for the vast majority, and I want to make it clear, we're talking non-traffic offenses here. We'll still be using tickets for traffic offenses on school grounds. You will have to initiate a sworn complaint, which an individual has personal knowledge. The byproduct will be we will reduce the cost of government. We will reduce the cost on taxpayers. We will reduce the burden on children and families in the state of Texas, and this is a good thing. Secondly, we will bring smart on crime solutions to Texas, okay? And we will also keep schools safe. One of the things that the Chief Justice made very clear, he did not give a lot of direction, but one thing he wanted to make sure we understand is that we are trying to balance interest here. And no one and none of the recommendations that came out of the Texas Judicial Council make Texas public schools any less safer. I want you to think about this. If you were at Luby's and you acted the fool, if you threw a tantrum, do you honestly think that a peace officer is going to show up and write you a ticket? No, you will be arrested. And at the end of the day, if a child is disruptive, violent, and out of control, the solution is not ticketing. Think about that. Ticketing a child? Ticketing someone who doesn't even have the ability to sign a legal contract, who doesn't even have the ability to drive themselves to court? I mean, it's convenient. Ticketing is convenient for police officers. It's been convenient for courts. It's not good public policy, and it's definitely not good public policy when it comes to our children. All right, finally, prosecutors and judges have accepted the fact in the municipal and justice court universe that things are not going to change. We would love to send all of these back to juvenile probation. It's not going to happen. So what we did, what the Texas Judicial Council did is we talked to prosecutors, okay? We talked to judges. We said, what tools do you need to make this fair, to make this system better for you? And so all of those recommendations are incorporated. And I would say that the tools, many of those tools are things that some judges and some courts are already doing without legislative authority, but they feel like they need the cover. They need a mandate that says, not that you have to do this, but if you want to do it, it's okay. And so a lot of the recommendations that you'll see summarized in the 14-page outline are things of that nature. All right, that is my time. You have my handout, and my contact information is included in there. If you have any questions for me, I've also given you a paper that kind of lays out the history of this issue. It's been going for quite a while now. I appreciate your time and your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Teller. That was very informative. And one of the things I want to add is that one of the proposals that the Judicial Council has to reduce ticketing is to put in kind of a tiered series of sanctions. That system has been implemented in a school system in Georgia about 6 years ago, and they saw a 76% reduction in the number of weapons on campus. They saw an almost 70% reduction in their referrals to their juvenile justice system, and at the same time, 20% more kids are graduating out out of their school. So clearly, this is something that we need to be considering for Texas if we want more of our kids graduating as well. I should add that actually Waco is piloting a project on this. It's only 1 year in, and they've already seen a 77% reduction in tickets. So this is really exciting stuff that we need to be looking at. And one of the people that's actually going to be looking at it in his duties as a legislator is Representative Strama, our next speaker. And we are so lucky to have him here because, we can talk about the numbers and we can talk about the data all we want, but he is going to be looking at actual bills and going to be deciding what is going to become law here in the great state of Texas. He began his political career working on Ann Richards' successful campaign for governor in 1990. He went on to become chief of staff for State Senator Rodney Ellis. In 1995, he left government to become director of programs at Rock the Vote, where he helped register more than 1 million new voters. Soon after, he founded the first company to register voters online, which helped empower over 700,000 Americans to vote in the 2000 election cycle. In 2004, he campaigned for state representative in an attempt to return to politics and won by just a few hundred votes. 2 years later, he was reelected with an overwhelming majority. Last session, he served on the Public Education and Energy Resources Committee. It was his fourth, which I believe should make this his fifth session. We are very lucky to have him and hear what he is going to think about all those things in the coming session. Please welcome Representative Strama.
So I was told my job was to come and react to what we heard first, and that's a lot to react to. My overall reaction is, that, and Tony Fabello had presented the study that Carl presented to the Public Education Committee in the House, and some of those numbers are really disturbing. The disparity, when you see African American students underrepresented in the number of mandatory violations, but overrepresented dramatically in the number of discretionary ones, that's a really hard data point to reconcile with justification. But I also want to take a minute to go back, because this is a problem of our own creation, and let's figure out, why we created it. I do these listening sessions with educators. I invite them to come and just kind of tell me what's going on in the world. And one of the questions I always ask is, if you could reduce your class size in half or reduce it by 2, but you get to pick which 2, which would you choose? Overwhelmingly, the majority of them choose the latter. It's very interesting to me, right? That wasn't the answer I expected when I started asking the questions, but they genuinely believe that the outlying behavior problems undermine the education for all the rest of the kids and prevent them from being effective in the classroom. That, I assume, is, in a nutshell, what gave rise to these policies. And it's a problem I don't know that we've solved yet, right? And I'm not sure, maybe this Georgia and this Waco, maybe those types of interventions get us to a better solution. But I will say I'm not sure in the end the real solution is one that is going to be less expensive than the system we have now. The student population in Texas is exploding. And it is exploding in and the fastest rate of growth is in the most challenging to educate segment of the student population, in the lowest economic income sectors. Just to illustrate that point, in the last decade, the student population in Texas grew 19%, fastest of any state in the country. In Central Texas, this region that I represent, the rate of growth was 38%, twice the fastest rate in the country. The socioeconomically disadvantaged, free and reduced lunch eligible student population in Central Texas grew 69% in Central Texas, and the English language learning population grew 171% in the last decade. We're a very rich state. We're also a very poor state. And the fastest growing part of the state is the poorest part of the state. And the economic conditions are a proxy representation of a whole lot of other social dysfunctions that make it really challenging to operate an efficient, functioning educational system. So I want to come back to that in a second. Let me make one other observation based on my own personal experience. In addition to serving in the legislature, my wife and I operate the Sylvan Learning Tutoring Centers in the Austin area. And we've been brought in to provide the same services that we provide affluent families in West Austin for $50 an hour at large scale for low-income kids in East Side public schools. And we've seen some really interesting things there. I actually spent most of this week that we weren't on the floor in staff meetings with over 100 tutors who are operating in the most challenging school environments, as challenging as any in the state, and who are operating under ideal instructional conditions because they are working in 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 student-teacher ratios. They have an instructional supervisor on the floor observing instruction with them so that if a problem emerges, they have someone to whom they can escalate it immediately without leaving the room, without distracting from instruction. They have somebody who can intervene. And even in those ideal circumstances, the most common the purpose of my staff meetings was to do a middle of the school year check-in and see, what kinds of support we can provide to enhance instruction. And the most common thing they asked for was additional training on intervention strategies for outlying behavior problems, additional support, and underlying it all, the biggest problem they expressed was, I have no leverage because the kids, in some cases, simply don't care what we do to them. That is profoundly disturbing. But it is the story of kids for whom consequences mean nothing. How does it get to that point, right? By the way, that's the act of desperation that's the level of desperation that causes educators to say, just write them a ticket and get them out of my hair. By the way, that the ISS numbers that Carl showed were interesting to me because at one of these campuses in particular, what the tutors described to me was behavior that was intended to get the kid into ISS, because ISS is a easier way for them to spend the day than learning. And they are going out of their way to seek ISS. They are manifesting behaviors for the purpose of being referred to in-school suspension. The problem with that is if you then deny them in-school suspension, they manifest the behaviors more aggressively. And the problem with that goes back to the problem of the teachers who said, I'd rather remove 2 than cut my class size in half. It's the concern for the kids who aren't manifesting those behaviors, who are trying to learn, and whose learning is compromised by those outlying behaviors. That's the problem that you have to find a solution to. Now, I will also, though, tell you this. At one particular high school in East Austin, we tutored 400 ninth graders last school year in ninth grade math. And it was in this intimate 2-to-1 ratio where when I went and observed instruction, what I saw was this was, in many cases, for many kids, the most sustained, positive, intimate attention from an adult they had ever gotten, for some of them including at home. And that year, the first semester of that year, at that high school, they recorded a reduction in disciplinary referrals for ninth graders from 700 in the first semester the preceding year when there was no tutoring to 200. Now, I have no way of isolating what the causal effect was, whether it was because of that relationship they were forming with their tutors, or whether it was some other intervention the school had enacted. I just don't know. But I have to think it had something to do with the investment in the relationship between the kids and the tutors. The problem is for classroom teachers with 30 kids in a room, you can't establish that rapport, that respect, that level of expectation, and frankly, the tutors would tell you of love. You just can't do it as intimately in a 30-to-1 classroom environment. So I got really interested in observing the effect that I was seeing from our tutoring in sort of, in some of the what has become a very hot topic in education circles because of a new book by Paul Tough called How Children Succeed. And I commend it to everyone who's interested in this topic. And Paul Tough had been the education reporter for the New York Times, and he had previously written a book called Whatever It Takes about the Harlem Children's Zone. But his new book kind of documents he went into the social science research, the biochemistry of the brain, the child development science, about why the Harlem Children's Zone model is an effective one. And you know, we've all been told that, you know, the prison industry projects what the capacity requirements for future prisons is going to be based on third grade reading levels, right? We've all been told that the biggest predictor of whether a kid is going to finish high school is how well they read in third grade. According to this research, you know what turns out to be a bigger predictor of whether a kid is going to finish high school? Whether a kid is going to try drugs, whether a kid is going to get pregnant before getting married? Bigger predictor is you put a 5-year-old in a room alone with a big, fat, fluffy marshmallow. And you tell the kid, you can eat that marshmallow, but if you wait 10 minutes, I'll come back with 2 marshmallows and you can eat both of them. Some of you may have seen on YouTube some hilarious videos of the faces kids make as they sit in that room alone trying to will themselves not to eat the marshmallow. But more seriously, they've been conducting that study, that experiment, for decades with thousands of kids to try to measure something about, you know, the ability to delay gratification. But some researcher finally said, you know what, we have a huge sample of kids who've taken this, who we've done this experiment to, who are now adults. Let's see what happened to them and if it correlates in any way to how they performed in the study. It turns out that the kids who could wait to eat the marshmallow, now that many of them are adults, the ones who could wait to eat the marshmallow were more likely to finish high school, more likely to go to college, more likely to get married before having a baby, more likely to say no to drugs. There is a stronger correlative effect to that than to their third grade reading skills. So more recently, since the book came out, there's been a study to try to find out, well, why can some kids wait to eat the marshmallow and other kids can't? So they gave a bunch of kids a piece of paper and some crayons, and they said, you can color, but wait a minute, and I'm going to come back with some really cool paints, and you can paint that piece of paper instead of color it. They came back really quickly, and for half the kids, they gave them the paints that they had promised. And for the other half, they said, sorry, we're out of paint, you can just color it. Then they gave all those kids the marshmallow test. The kids' ability to wait to eat the marshmallow was 5 times stronger if they'd been given the paints they'd been promised. A total metaphor for what life for a child in poverty is like. For kids in poverty, adults never bring the paints they promised. Their surrounding ecosystem never meets their expectations, what they're entitled to expect. And so they develop no trust in adults. They develop no trust in the future. They develop no ability to delay gratification. Teachers tell kids, I know this isn't fun, but work hard now, it'll pay off for you in the future. What future, say their kids? And so they don't develop the executive function, the impulse control, the ability to regulate their own behavior that turns out to be more important and predictive of their success than any cognitive skills we try to drill into them in school, and we can't do that anyway because they're not paying attention. And so if we really want to get at this problem, we have to get at that problem. And that's a problem that is not inexpensive to resolve.
Thank you so much, Representative. That was wonderful, very thoughtful information that we all need to be considering. We are lucky enough to have just a few minutes for some questions. So if anybody has one, just raise your hand, and we are going to find you with a mic. I'm actually going to take a point of personal privilege and ask them a question first, if you don't mind. We talked a lot about suspensions and Class C misdemeanor tickets. One other component of the school discipline system is, as Carl had briefly mentioned, the DAAPs and the JJAAPs, disciplinary alternative education placements, and the juvenile justice alternative education placements for suspended and expelled students respectively. Where are we at with those? Are those in a good place? Do we need, are there any reforms called for in those systems? Are they serving their purposes, goals? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I'll tell you that in all cases, students being referred to JJAEPs because of violation of the law, not a school discipline issue. Okay. So we have to look at that. They're all violations of the law, things that people were arrested for, other than the persistent misbehavior, you know, that, which is, I think is, if you can't define it, why do we have it? What's persistent and what's misbehavior? But for the violations of the law, yeah, they're where they need to be. And, you know, at least those that bring a gun to school and get expelled and go to JJEP are still getting an education. Yet children are safer, you know, because their classmates aren't bringing guns.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's something that Texas should be quite proud of, because there are a few other states that do provide that place for expelled students to go.
Jeanette, what I've heard, and I don't know this to be true, but what I've heard is that the disciplinary alternative education programs vary wildly in their quality, and that, so there probably is some real attention needed there.
Yeah, some of the kids want to stay there.
Oh,
Yeah,
My
they don't want to go
goodness.
back to their main school. They want to stay there because they get more attention.
So I will say, you know, and this also is informed by my private sector experience, what the challenge for educating kids in an alternative education placement is that they all enter at different skill levels. And you have no critical mass of, you have no ability to group kids by ability and provide group instruction to them, at least not in any kind of efficient way. So you end up either having to have, you end up having to differentiate instruction to each kid in a very, very significant way, which is, by the way, the best way to teach kids, but it's the most expensive way to teach kids. Long run, one of our goals needs to be making those places where kids don't just, well, first of all, where they aren't just warehoused, but where they're educated. And they have to be educated actually in an accelerated way to the point that when they come back to school, they are able to keep up in class. A lot of behavior problem is caused by the fact that in large group instructional environments, half the class is not being taught at the level of their ability. In some cases because they could be going faster. In some cases because they're totally lost. And so the ability to differentiate instruction to kids' unique skill levels is the biggest challenge I think the whole public school system faces because of the amazing heterogeneity of the skill levels of the kids in the public school system, but even more so in the alternative education placements. My hope is that technology presents the long-term solution to that. Yeah. But I will say I'm dissatisfied with the current state of offerings in the educational technology space. I've yet to see something where you can just sort of, you know, offload to the computer the instructional tasks and have an adult supervising a group of kids all working on their own thing at their own pace. I mean, I just don't think that we're there yet, but that's where we hopefully will be someday.
that's the direction.
One of the things that I was able to glean in the last 2 years talking to people in the special education community is that, first of all, you know, I think that there's maybe a legitimate debate to be had about if a child is already placed in an alternative education placement, then should they follow up with criminal filings. I mean, there seems like there ought to be some fairness. If you've punished once, how far does the punishment go? But one of the things that really has yet to be discussed that is addressed in the in the Texas Judicial Council's recommendations is that it appears that the way Texas law is currently written allows public schools to do an end run on the IDEA. If you have a child whose behavior is a manifestation of their disability, there is a criminal justice exception in the federal law that says, you know, you can't punish little Johnny by making him stand in a corner if the reason why he has to stand in a corner is a manifestation of his disability. That would be prohibited under IDEA. But if he acts out and that's a manifestation of his disability, the criminal justice exception right now would allow you to send that child to municipal injustice court for disruption of class. And so one of the things that's addressed in this recommendation is that judges and prosecutors, see right now, here's the thing, in every other criminal case, prosecutors choose what cases they're going to prosecute. And municipal injustice court's more like that episode of I Love Lucy when they're working in the chocolate factory and everything's just going down the assembly line. Prosecutors want to...
That is an obscure reference.
Thank you very much. Prosecutors would want information on Class C misdemeanors like prosecutors would have in Class A and B misdemeanors, or like juvenile court prosecutors would have, so that they can get that case off the assembly line as soon as possible. And furthermore, judges, before they determine that this child has the capacity or a culpable mental state to commit the offense, they need to know if the child's special ed. They need to know more about this child. So that's one of the recommendations that's placed in this package.
That's great.
Yeah, but I think we label students special ed or they have some sort of issue way too easy. There are a lot of them that have labels that really shouldn't be labeled. You know, so you get a huge percentage of the school. They all have something. They're ED, LD, you know, AM and FM. I mean, you know, there's some kind of letter that that they're labeled with. So you have to be very careful about that, I think.
That's a good point. Questions?
Senator Howard Stevenson, Utah. I'm going to be speaking on the next panel in the next room on educational technology. And I just wanted to tell Representative Strama that there are amazing tools for individualizing instruction in incredible ways that are increasing student performance for these kinds of populations in particular. We're going to be talking about how legislators have the constitutional prerogative and moral obligation to make it happen, because it's not happening by school boards on their own.
Yeah, I'll just tell you I don't agree. I mean, and I've met a really good company from Utah that has a reading program that was down here marketing for a while, and I'm in the business. I scour the marketplace for good technology. I was an internet entrepreneur in the late 90s. I think there's a lot of companies trying to get there, and I trust that the private market, that the extraordinary upside to somebody figuring out how to do it will get us there. But I have yet to see really strong evidence of dramatic results that really achieve what the goal should be, which is, you know, I've seen some stuff that does. I just haven't seen it, but I'll be happy to visit with you afterward and hear what examples you've got. I scour the research looking for who's got a study that says something dispositive, that we've cracked the code. I just don't see it. But I know it's gonna happen, because technology always, when there is something that we need technology to do, eventually technology does it, right? And this is too obvious an opportunity for the technology industry. I just can't imagine, you know, I'm frankly shocked that it takes so long. Whenever I see folks from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who I think have, you know, spent a lot of money on some misguided ideas, I'm like, why aren't you operating in your sweet spot? Why? And they are now funding Khan Academy and some other stuff, but of the billions and billions of dollars they've invested in education, so little of it has been in software. I just can't understand why they don't think that that's where their highest, best use of their money is.
Good question. Down here, I took your turn earlier.
Carl, just real quickly, of those African-American kids that are receiving disproportionate punishment, have you done an analysis and teased out of those people administering the justice to those kids? Is there a pattern? Is it like a black woman or a Hispanic male?
Great question, and I've had that one before. The answer is no, unfortunately, but I think I think there's some other research that looks at that, but our study does not.
Over here. Go ahead.
On the 5 school districts that were in this model study, you indicated they were large districts. How large, how small was the largest? And why didn't you look at smaller schools, or maybe use cap and have a different model to present on those?
I don't think I did say that they were large districts, but, okay. Let me visit with you after the presentation. I'm going to take a look at what the study itself says and try to give you a better answer.
We have some other questions, but I'm so sorry. We are running out of time, and the other folks are waiting in the hallway. But I know that our panelists will stick around for a little bit. Grab them ahead of time. I want to thank all of our panelists. They were absolutely fantastic. Gave us some great information. Thank you. And thank you again to the Chief Justice of the Court of Criminal Appeals, Sharon Keller, and Mike Griffiths as well. Thanks, everyone.
That's why.